In this video, I will be discussing how we graph inequalities. This first inequality, we have x is greater than 4. When you have the variable by itself with inequalities, the number is always going to be where you put your open or closed dot. So we can start with an open dot at 4. But now we have to determine, is that dot actually going to be open or closed? If you have greater than or less than, your dot is going to be open. But if you would have greater than or equal to with that little line underneath, or less than or equal to, the dot would be closed because that means it includes that number. So in this case, since we don't have that line underneath the greater than to make it greater than or equal to, our dot is going to stay open. But now we have to determine which way do we shade. Well, x is greater than 4. Which means that any number you plug in for x must be bigger than 4. So let's take a look at maybe just try a number. What about 5? Well, if we plugged in 5 for x, 5 is greater than 4, so that would be a solution. So we would shade to the right because we want every number that's bigger than 4 because we're talking about all the numbers greater than 4. If you wanted to try 0, 0 is always a good number to try. If you plugged in 0 for x, you would get 0 is greater than 4. But 0 is not greater than 4, so you actually wouldn't shade to the left. So you can pick any number on your number line to plug in. If it's true, you want to shade towards that number. If it's false, you want to shade the opposite direction of that number. This next one we have -2 is greater than or equal to t. Since the variable is by itself, our dot is going to be at our number, -2. But do we fill in the dot or leave it open? That's all determined by this little line here. If you have the line, which means you're including -2, we want to fill in the dot. If the line wasn't there, we would just keep it open. But now, which way do we shade? Again, the easiest way is just to pick a number. I always like to use 0, but you don't have to use 0. You can use any number on your number line. If we plugged in 0, we would have -2 is greater than or equal to 0. Is that true? No, -2 is less than 0. Because it's not true, we want to shade away from 0 in the opposite direction. We don't want to include that number. You could also think of it as -2 is always going to be bigger than t, or it could be equal to, which is why we shaded in the dot. And so we want to shade to all the numbers that are less than -2, because -4, that would be less than -2. -5 is less than -2. So those are all included. And again, if you started plugging those in, you would notice you're going to get true statements. -2 is always bigger than any number that we pick over here. So now we're looking at r is less than 0. Since the variable is by itself, we can put a dot at our number 0. And then do we fill in this dot? We don't, because there isn't a line underneath the less than symbol. So because of that, we're going to keep our dot open. It means 0 is not included in our solution. Which way do we shade? Well, r is less than 0, which means any number we pick should be smaller than 0. All the numbers smaller than 0 are to the left of 0. But again, if you want to plug in a number instead, you could have -5, if we choose our -5 over here. If we plug that in for r, -5 is less than 0, so that should be included in our solution, which is why we would shade to the left. If you wanted to plug in maybe 3 to see if that would work, 3 is less than 0, that is not true. So again, we should be shading away from the 3. So again, if it helps, just pick a number on your number line. And if it makes the statement true, you shade towards that number. If it makes it false, like this 3 is less than 0, then you're going to shade away from the number. And for our last one, we have m is greater than or equal to -1. Since m is by itself, we can put an open dot at -1. And now we have to determine, do we close it or do we keep it open? Because this little line is underneath our greater than symbol, making it greater than or equal to, because of that line, we have to start filling in the dot because we are including -1 in our solution. Now we have to determine which way we shade. If you read the inequality as is, m is greater than or equal to -1, we want all the numbers greater than -1. which means that we would shade to the right because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all those numbers are all bigger than -1. But again, if you wanted to plug in a number and test to see if it's true, if we tried plugging in 0, we would have 0 is greater than or equal to -1. That is a true statement, which means we shade towards 0, and that's to the right where we already shaded. If you plugged in, say, -4, we would have -4 is greater than or equal to -1, which is not true. And because that's not true, we want to shade away from -4. So -4 should not be shaded, which means we shade to the right. And that is how you graph inequalities.